All right, we are very nearly at 5 minutes past the hour, so I think we can slowly get started with the introductions and the hellos. So thank you again very much to those of you who are here today. I hope we're going to have an exciting and a meaningful session. For those of you who I have not met before, my name is Stephanie and I am one of the anatomists from Learning Curve. And I have my MSc in Human Anatomy and also lectured at Stellenbosch University. So I have quite a deep understanding, number one, of the struggles that students face when learning anatomy and physiology. But number two, the perspective of lecturing anatomy, and again, some of the challenges that I've experienced in that space and in delivering lessons to students. So for today, we're going to go back to a lot of the basics of Primal Pictures or Anatomy TV, because a lot of anatomy modules are only starting now in the second semester, and some of you may not have used the platform before. I want this session to be quite engaging, so we do usually keep everyone muted in case we have a lot of participants, but I hope that that won't be a barrier between me hearing from you. So if you have any questions or comments as we go through today's session, please pop them in the chat box because I will address any questions at the end. Lastly, I do just want to remind you, if you don't know already, that we do offer one-on-one training sessions for staff members at our client institutions. I know some of you did indicate that you would like one of those sessions when you registered for this webinar, so we will reach out to you individually and see what we can set up. But please don't hesitate to reach out to us at any stage and ask for assistance, because that is what our anatomist team is here for. So what we'll go through today, starting at the beginning, is accessing this online resource and navigating the home page. We'll then focus on improving or enlivening your lesson design by incorporating some of Primal's content into your lectures. And then we'll also discuss asynchronous learning, or promoting your students to guide their own learning outside of your classroom. And the techniques that we'll focus on there is, number one, adding links to Primal content that will allow the students to explore the anatomy and physiology and hopefully answer their own questions and fix their own issues in their understanding by themselves. And then we will also discuss embedding the content into your learner management system or your module pages on your online platform for your students. We'll do those topics in the anatomy and physiology and 3D real-time titles. And then we're going to jump over into PALMS, or the perceptual and adaptive learning module, which is where I will show you how students can work on improving their structural recognition, or in other words, accurately identifying anatomy. And I will also show you how you as facilitators can track student progression throughout their learning on the PALMS title, and how you can even set assessments for them. Now, the content that our different institutions have access to does differ depending on what your institution has subscribed to. So I'm hoping you have access to the titles that we're discussing today. But if you don't have access and you would like to try it out for free for 30 days, please do let us know and we can open that up and then have a discussion with your institution if you perhaps want to include more content in your subscription. Okay, so very briefly, I'll give you an overview of the 3 titles that we'll take a look at today, and then we'll dive into them and explore enlivening your lectures, helping students guide their own learning, and then improving their identification and tracking that progress. So the first title we will take a look at today, which is the bread and butter of Primal Pictures, that's the Anatomy and Physiology title. This title is the most similar to a traditional textbook in that it guides the students through the learning and gives them all of that explanatory, theoretical text about the anatomy, physiology, and histology of the entire human body. But it has a lot of 3-dimensional and engaging content that's given to the students, along with the explanation, to help them deepen their understanding. This title is broken down into 20 different learning modules, 11 of which are the 11 systems of the human body. And the other modules that you'll find are lovely introductory topics that will go over, for example, anatomical terminology and positions and planes. And then we also have some follow-up, more complicated modules after the systems, which includes development and inheritance, which is where it will go over some of the embryology, go through gestation and labor. Then the next title we'll take a look at is the 3D real-time title. Here we're going to focus on creating really engaging content for your lectures. And 3D real-time is our very powerful 3D model tool where you can view every visible structure of the human body. You have complete freedom and flexibility with the 3D model. You can perform a virtual dissection, and you can create custom labeled diagrams or test questions using the different tools in there. So we will explore that. And then lastly, we will finish off with PALMS, or the Perceptual and Adaptive Learning module. This is a very powerful, number one, learning tool to help students improve their identification of anatomy. And number two, it has an assessment component, and you as facilitators can track the learning component and the assessment component. And the assessment side could be used to save yourself some time in setting either formal or informal assessments for your students. And we'll go through all of that and how you can interpret their data. Okay, but without further ado, let's not have death by PowerPoint. I'm now going to change which screen I'm sharing, and I'm going to jump onto the homepage of Primal Pictures. So starting all the way at the beginning, how do you access this platform? Now, our different client institutions may have the access set up in two different ways. So I will explain these two ways. And if you have any issues with access, please chat to your librarian or reach out to me and we can get any issues you may have sorted, because I want to make sure you can access this anytime, anywhere. So the most common way in which access is set up for our institutions is through IP authentication. So without fancy jargon, the way you will access your content, if access is through IP authentication, is that when you are on campus and connected to the university Wi-Fi, you can open up your web browser and go directly to the URL, which is anatomy.tv. And if you're on campus and connected to the university Wi-Fi, it will automatically log you in. If you are not on campus and not connected to the university Wi-Fi, you will need to access the resource through your library's list of e-resources or e-databases. By clicking on the link through the library webpage, it will automatically log you in to your university's subscription. Some of our institutions do work through username and password. So that means you'll open up your web browser and once again go directly to anatomy.tv, but it won't automatically log you in. It will ask you for a username and password. I'm already signed in here, so we're not seeing that. But if your institution works that way, you should already have the username and password and know about it. Like I said, if you have any issues, either chat to me or your librarian. Once you are on Primal Pictures or anatomy.tv, the first thing that will pop up is, do you want to customize your experience with a personal profile? If you already have one, you can sign in, or if you don't, you can create a profile. I already have one, so I'm simply going to sign in. But I want to say that you don't have to set up a personal profile. You can continue without it. But I would recommend setting up a personal profile for 4 different reasons. When you create a personal profile, it unlocks the recommended, favorites, and recently viewed tabs. Without a personal profile, you'll simply see all titles. When you set up your personal profile, it will ask you, I'm going to come over here to edit mine, but it will ask you what your occupation is, whether you are a librarian, a faculty member, a student. So I'm going to say that I'm a lecturer. And you can choose your specialization. So as an example, let's say today my specialization is radiology, and you can submit that. And with that information, in the recommended tab, it will recommend titles to you based on your specialization. So these are going to be the titles that are most helpful to me as a radiology lecturer. The favorites tab is also unlocked, and that allows you to favorite any of the individual modules found on the all titles page, and that allows you to just quickly access your favorited information. And then you also get the recently viewed tab, which allows you to quickly jump into the last thing you were perhaps working on last night. There is one other great benefit to a personal profile, but I'll discuss that when we encounter a working example of it. So let's just go through a little bit of navigating this homepage over here before we dive into the first title. We've gone through the dashboard here and how you can access all titles available to you or the specialized information based on your personal profile. After that, we have the Learn tab. This is one of the latest additions to Primal Pictures. We're going to ignore this one for now because currently none of our clients do have access to it. But if you would like more information on this and potentially to trial it, let me know and I'll take you through that. But that isn't the focus of today. The next tab we find is different ways in which you can browse through the Primal content, either through the different regions of the human body. You can take a systemic approach to the information. You can look for a specific type of media. So Primal has movies, 3D models, slides, or 2D images and animations. So you could look for a specific media type. Or you have by title, which is the same as the list of titles found in your dashboard. After that, there is also an alphabetical index, just like a traditional textbook. But I must be honest and say I don't usually use the index. My preferred way of navigating Primal Pictures is to go directly to the title that I know is helpful to me, but I'm aware that I'm only able to do that because I know the Primal Pictures content very, very well. If you're fairly new to the platform, it may be difficult for you to know which title you need to go to for a specific piece of information. And that's where the search bar and the results pane comes into play. And this is the alternative method I will use to look for content instead of going directly to the title. So let's say we want to look at the stomach today. You can search for that structure and you will get all of the different 3D models, related structures, movies, and slides that relate to the stomach. And you can open up multiple search panes. And now let's look for an accessory digestive organ. Here we have all of the content available for the pancreas, and you can toggle between your fields as you go through the content. Okay, but I think that takes us through access and general navigation of the homepage, as well as most of the information about the personal profiles. So let's now dive into the meat of today, and we are going to start, like I said, with the Anatomy and Physiology title. This is essentially your very engaging online textbook. For today's example, I'm going to stick to thoracic anatomy, and I'm going to go into the respiratory system. Now, just to remind you, for each of these 20 learning modules here in Anatomy and Physiology, it will guide you through the anatomy, physiology, and histology for that module or system. So in this case, the respiratory system. While we explore this title, number one, I want you to bear in mind that you can use this as a live lecturing tool to lecture your students, just like I'm using it today to train you on it. Number two, I will get to the download function. You can download any of this content to insert it into your PowerPoints, into Word documents, PDFs, test questions, anything like that. And number three, you can embed this content into your learning management system, and I will show you how to do that to curate what your students are looking at and to give them some supplementary information right there on their module page to help them guide their own learning. And number four, I will show you how to link content throughout your teaching material to guide your students to further information to once again help them guide their own learning. Okay, so let's firstly start with orientating ourselves on the page. On the left-hand side, you will find your menu bar. In the middle, you have your main viewing pane or your interaction pane. And on the right-hand side, we have our information pane. At the first icon, this is where this system or learning module has been broken down into different topics. So we start with an introduction, then we go through the upper and lower respiratory tracts. We go through voice production, pulmonary ventilation, and then some more physiology and histology-based topics at the bottom. But for today's example, let's use the anatomy of the upper respiratory tract. So if I were lecturing you today on the upper respiratory tract, I could open this up and simply use this as my lecturing content. I can use the information pane to guide me through the information that I am delivering to my students. And while I explain this information to them, we have wonderful visuals here to help them understand what we are explaining. So most of the time, when you open up this content, it will be 3D models, and you can interact with these models in different ways. You'll see there are rollover labels for all of the visible structures, so you can highlight structures and focus on them as you lecture your students about them. You can also move through different layers of anatomy. Number one, by clicking on the different layers here, but number two, by using the up and down arrows at the bottom of your screen. You can also rotate these models by using the left and right arrows or by simply clicking down and swiping along your screen. I do want to say that when I share my screen over the internet and I'm showing 3D models, sometimes it seems a little bit jittery on the viewer's side, but I do want to assure you that these models that we'll look at today all move seamlessly and smoothly when you interact with them yourselves. So please do go and give it a go if you haven't played around with them before. Okay, and then we could continue to scroll through the information pane, deliver the information, and open up the visuals that are helping explain the content that we are delivering. Okay, now throughout the content, and this is geared towards the students, there are interactive learning exercises to test the students on what they've just learned. And this first one over here is an identification exercise. So it wants me to firstly identify the epiglottic cartilage, for example. And then I could work through all these examples. And once I was finished, close this up and continue to work through my lesson. Okay. So now for you as lecturers, if you are not going to use this as a live lecturing tool, there are other ways in which you can incorporate this content into your teaching. So let's say I'm busy collecting information for my students on the upper respiratory tract. I'm going to move to some of the icons towards the bottom of our menu, but I will take you through the rest towards the end, so please don't worry. We're going to focus now on pulling information for our lectures and providing content for students to further their learning. So number one, if I'm wanting to include this image in my own lectures or PowerPoints, you can download any of this content. So if we come to this download function over here, we can either save an image of a 3D model or any image we encounter throughout the lessons by clicking Save Image, and you'll see that it then automatically downloads. And there I have my downloaded image on a transparent background. If you wanted to, you could also download this entire lesson as a PDF. The text option I don't love. It's just plain text with no images. I find it just a bit boring. So I do prefer the PDF option. And here you will get the entire lesson with small versions of all of the images to help give some orientation for what content is being delivered. I should also highlight that throughout these lessons, there's a range of different content, including dissection images, which are also interactive to help with identification, but very important for a realistic understanding of the anatomy. So once again, you could save this image and insert it into your PowerPoints. Now, in terms of helping the students guide their own learning, through working with different institutions, what I've found is very helpful is including links to relevant content in your teaching material or in your PowerPoints. Often lecturers create a PowerPoint, they then upload it to the LMS so the students can download it and study from it. But if you were to include Primal Pictures links throughout your teaching content, you can then revert your students to the resource to allow them to explore it on a deeper level by themselves. So let's say I am lecturing my students on the paranasal sinuses. And the sinuses are quite difficult to understand the three-dimensionality thereof. So I may want to include a link to this 3D model for my students to explore the sinuses. So what I could do is come down to the copy link icon. I can copy a link of this 3D model, and I can then insert that link in a relevant place in my PowerPoint to direct the students to it. And you can send a link to anything. If I wanted to link them to the dissection image, I could then come and copy this link. If I wanted to link them to a different 3D model, if I wanted this one, again, you can copy that link. So if you are wanting to insert links into your teaching material, just make sure you're looking at the content that you want to share, come and click the copy link button, and then go and paste it into your content. Okay, and then another important strategy in helping the students guide their own learning, and for lack of a better term, to motivate, encourage, or force them to interact with the information, you can embed it on your module page using the embed function. So with the embed function, any 3D or interactive content will retain this interactivity when you embed it. So they'll still be able to rotate the model, manipulate the layers, and have the rollover labels. So number one, when you are embedding, if you just want the 3D model or image, you won't select embed text. But if you would like this model, along with the information pane, you will click embed text. If you would like a link to where the content came from on Primal Pictures, you will include the product link. If you didn't want that, you could leave it off. And then you can play around with the window size to see what works best on the layout of your module page. And lastly, select your learner management style, after which it will generate an embed code for you to copy. And then you can go and paste that embed code into the embed function on your learner management system. Okay, there is some other content over here that we didn't look at, and I'll quickly breeze through if we go back to our menu on the left. We had a look at the topics or the lessons, and I think this gives you a good idea of how the lessons work. After that, there's simply an alphabetical index, a way to look for a specific structure or piece of information. But I should also highlight that there is a search bar at the top of your information pane for you to use to look for any structure at any moment. The flask icon is where all of the interactive activities that are found throughout the lessons have been collected, just for ease of use in case you're just wanting to look at the activities and not scroll through all the lessons to find them. And the same goes for the light bulb icon, except this time it's all of the quizzes that are found throughout the lessons. Then we have some more application style information, which includes number one, common clinical cases that will relate to this system, or in this example, the respiratory system. There's also information on how aging will affect the system. And lastly, for some really wonderful activities, we have case studies, where the case will be presented and there are various questions that will be posed relating to this case, and the students can then try and answer the questions before revealing the answer with the eye icon. Okay, but that brings us to the end of anatomy and physiology. We're now going to jump over into the 3D real-time title. Before we jump into it, I do want to highlight that this title has apps available for download, which you can download by clicking these links when logged into your subscription on your mobile phone. So you'll open up your web browser on your mobile phone and jump onto anatomy.tv, come and click on the download links, and then you can download the different regions of the human body. There are two reasons why the apps are really beneficial. Number one, it means you can use the content fully offline. Number two, it has an augmented reality function, which allows you to project any 3D model into your reality using the camera. And I would really recommend playing around with that setting because it's quite a fun and engaging way for the students to interact with the anatomy. Okay, but here in 3D real time, we're going to focus again on creating engaging 3D content for your students, as well as creating custom labeled diagrams or test questions. So starting off once again with orientating ourselves, we have the menu bar on the left-hand side, the main viewing pane or the interaction pane in the middle, and this is where our 3D model will sit. And on the right-hand side, we have a list of structures, which is where we can create our own 3D model. So we'll start off there. I'm going to clear this field, and we're going to create a very quick rudimentary 3D model, and then I will take you through everything in the menu and get into the deliciousness of creating engaging content for your lectures. So firstly, please bear in mind, once again, this can be a live lecture tool, just like I'm using with you today. If I did create my own 3D model that I wanted to use in a class, I would pre-prepare it and save it by using the favoriting icon, but I'll show you how to favorite in a short moment. Let's first make our own model. So I'm going to focus again on the respiratory system here. If you click the arrow next to any group of structures, you can maximize the list of structures and you can add in individual pieces of anatomy one at a time. If I were to simply click on the entire group of structures, it's going to add all of the structures from that group. So here I have all of the lobes of my lung, and I have my trachea and primary bronchi, which are then segmenting into the secondary, tertiary, and terminal branches. Okay, so that's a very quick example of how you can create your own 3D model. But I'm going to rely on Primal's pre-made models for today. So at the window frame icon, this is where you can find dissection images and pre-made 3D models where the key organs and organ systems have been modeled separately. So let's come and take a look at the 3D model of the lungs and pleura. And you will see that for each model, there are 5 different tissue depth options available, starting all the way from the deepest to the most superficial. But for today, let's take the lungs with the parietal and visceral pleura. Now, with these 3D models, you can rotate them by clicking down with the left cursor of your mouse and swiping along your screen, and that's how we can rotate him. You can also use this nice box at the top left-hand corner to move between lovely preset angles. You can also use your left, right, up and down keys on your keyboard to have nice, smooth rotations. Then you can move the position of the model on your screen by clicking down your left and right cursors at the same time, and then I can move him around and change his position. Now you may have noticed that there are rollover labels for all of the visible structures, and if you select a structure, it will highlight it. Now, if you click on the text box while you have selected a structure, it's going to give you that wonderful theoretical explanation about the anatomy as you explore it visually. So again, really wonderful for the students to guide their own learning, but you could use this if you are using it as a live lecture tool to guide the information that you're delivering to your students. Now we can use these keys at the bottom to start to perform a bit of a virtual dissection and take a look at some of the structures in more detail. So number one, with the parietal pleura, I'm going to hide it or virtually dissect it away, and do the same for the visceral pleura. I'm going to hide that, and now we've dissected that away, and now I can view the individual lobes of my right lung. If you select a structure and click Context, it will show you just that structure with its relevant related anatomical context. With Inspect, you can isolate just that structure and take a look at its individual morphology, and then deselect to go back. If you examine a structure, it turns everything else into X-ray mode and allows you to explore the relational anatomy in a bit more detail. And then if you ghost a structure, it will turn that structure into X-ray mode and allow you to see underlying or innerlying anatomy. So now we can appreciate the internal segmentation of the bronchi over here. Okay, and then if I wanted to dissect that away, again, I could select it and hide it. And now start performing a bit of a virtual dissection again. Okay, so that's how you can interact with these 3D models. At this window frame icon, we also had dissection images, incredibly important for having a realistic view of the anatomy. What's wonderful about the dissection images here is that when you open up a dissection, it will automatically open up a 3D model that mirrors that dissection to help interpretation of the dissection. So this dissection can either be quarter page, half page, or full page. But this half page option is really great because now our dissection and our 3D model are on similar scales. And with this dissection, you still have rollover labels for every visible structure, and you can highlight a structure. And you may notice that when you highlight a structure, either on the dissection or the 3D model, it will highlight it on both to help with this interpretation of the cadaveric or patient anatomy. Okay, so now we know about the dissection images and we have a good understanding of how we can interact with these 3D models. So let's now go through the rest of the menu. Next, we had the favorite icon. And I mentioned that if I created my own 3D model that I wanted to use in a lecture, it would be a really great idea to favorite it over here so that I can easily revisit it and I don't have to recreate that model each time. What I forgot to mention while we were in the previous module, Anatomy and Physiology, but it's relevant here and it's relevant across all titles. When you favorite content and you are logged into a personal profile, your favorited content is stored to the cloud. So that means no matter what device, whether it's my phone or my PC, no matter what device I access Primal Pictures from, my favorites are accessible on any device as long as I'm logged into my personal profile. If you don't create a personal profile and are not signed into that, if you favorite content, it's going to be stored to the device that you are currently using and won't be accessible on other devices. Okay, so that's the fourth and final benefit for a personal profile. Next, we have a range of settings that you could change according to personal preferences, but one that I would like to highlight is the cadaver colors setting. This setting is very important for forcing the students to think more critically about the difference between an artery, vein, and nerve based on the vessel's landmarks and what structures it supplies or drains and what structures it's running in relation to, instead of just relying on this color coding, because unfortunately the patients and the cadavers aren't color coded. And it's important to have an understanding of the difference between these vessels based on their anatomy and not based on their color. Okay, now let's create a custom labeled diagram for one of our lectures or a test question. And that we can do with the labeling, the pinning, and the drawing tools over here. So number one, you can add in a label using the plus label icon, and that will add a label into any structure you select. You can alter the label if you want to. So right now I'm giving the names of the structures. So this would be a label diagram. But let's say I want to turn this into a test question. So I can click alter label, select the label, and rather say name the structure. Now let's say I want it to be incredibly clear that my label is going towards the subclavian artery. I can add a pin into that structure by clicking plus pin and popping it in. It will automatically come up with a structure label, but if you click the minus label over here and then select that, it will be removed. And now I have my pin in the structure and the name, the structure instruction. You can also add a freestanding text box. So let's say I wanted to say question 1, or I wanted to type out theory for my students. You could add that in there. You can also use different drawing tools to either circle or point to a specific structure, or even use the flexible line tool to potentially follow the course of a vessel. Okay, but let's say I now want to save an image of this perfect, wonderful diagram that I've created. You can do so with the camera icon. So yeah, I can save a snapshot. I'm going to call it absolute rubbish, and I'm going to click OK. I want to save this. And now a drop-down box will come from the top of the screen, allowing me to download this image. And there I can then insert it either into my lecture content or into the test. Okay, and then lastly, linking your students to relevant content throughout your lectures. So if you want to include dissection images or 3D models that are really going to help students with the understanding, let's say I want to share a link to this 3D model for my students. You can come down to the share link option. Again, I'm going to type in absolute rubbish and I'm going to confirm. And now I can copy this to my clipboard and paste these links into my teaching material. So again, these links are just really helpful to get the students to explore the anatomy on a further level outside of the classroom. Okay, and the only icon we didn't look at is this. It's another way in which you can rotate and move the model, but I would much rather recommend simply using your mouse. But that brings us to the end of 3D real time. Lastly, today we are going to explore PALMS, or the Perceptual and Adaptive Learning module. It's quite complex how this works in the background, but it's very simple to use. So I will give you some of the explanation about how the Powerful Learning module works, but I'll go through the experience from the student's perspective, and then I will show you how you can track their learning progression and their achievements in assessments. The first time you use PALMS, you do need to create a profile if you haven't already. The reason why you and your students will need to create profiles is because, number one, for each student, it gives an individualized learning experience based on their knowledge and their needs. And to allow them to track their own learning history, the data needs to be stored within their profile. You as lecturers will also need to create a profile. So number one, go and explore it yourselves. But number two, to set up classes using administration and to view the score reporter sheet or the data for your students. Students will not have access to the administration or score reporter side. These are facilitator access tools. If you are interested in using these tools in PALMS and you are not set up as a facilitator, please email me and I will get the administration and score reporter sides activated on your side. Okay. So let's firstly have a quick overview of what PALMS is. PALMS is a perceptual and adaptive learning module. It's here to help the students improve their identification of anatomy. There is the learning side, which gives them feedback and helps them improve. And then there is the assessment side, where it simulates the assessment environment. It asks them to identify the anatomy and will give them a summary of their achievement at the end. In the learning side, it runs a powerful algorithm in the background, which computes the student's accuracy, so whether they are right or wrong, and it also computes their fluency. Fluency is based on their response time, and it gives an indication of how confident the student was in the answer that they gave. And by computing the accuracy and the fluency, the algorithm is going to customize which structures that student is asked to identify so that it moves past the structures they already know and it focuses on the structures that they are struggling with. Okay, that was a lot of words. So let's look at a working example to help you understand how that works. So number one, if I'm a student and I'm coming to improve my anatomy identification, I will click on Anatomy Suite. I will then select which region I want to work in. And today I'm going to work on thoracic organs. Now, when we jump here, there will be instructions which will cover what I'm going to tell you. There is the assessment side and the learning side. I'll take you through an example of both. We can then change which structures we are working on within the thorax over here. And if we were done with the thorax, we could simply click back and choose a different region, but I'm going to stick with the thorax and specifically the thoracic organs. Then at the bottom, this is where we have data to interpret how well we are doing, but we'll go through the data once we've had a look at an example. So let's start with the learning quiz. So this is where it's going to simulate the spot test. It's going to ask me to identify anatomy. But while I answer these questions, it is computing my accuracy and my fluency. It's going to identify which structures I have mastered and move past those structures. And then it will rather focus my questions on the structures that I have not yet mastered and I'm not confident or accurate in. So in those examples, I gave the correct answer and you'll see it gave me feedback. It said, wonderful, you are correct. Let's give an incorrect answer. So here, because I'm in the learning side, it's going to give me feedback and help me learn from my mistakes. But that algorithm is going to remember that I'm getting the thoracic esophagus incorrect. And the algorithm is going to remember that and it's going to keep working on the esophagus until I master it. Not straight away. It will give me a few other questions first, and then it will ask it to me again. So let's get this one wrong again. There we go. It's going to give us feedback and remember that that one was wrong. Okay, so this is an example of the learning side from the student's perspective. I'm going to close that off. And let's now go and interpret how well I'm doing in my learning. So I can see that I've spent nearly 6 minutes here. I've viewed all 16 categories. So each category is a structure that I need to learn how to identify. And so far, I've mastered 5 out of the 16 categories. So I'm doing okay in my learning, but I still need to spend more time here. We'll move past the assessment history and go straight to learning history. Here's every single problem I have attempted and my accuracy and fluency for each. But this is a little bit overwhelming and doesn't provide me with a summary. And that's where the categories option comes in. Here I can see each of the categories or each of the structures. I can see how many times I have attempted each of them. I can see my average accuracy for them, as well as my fluency, which is based on my response time or my confidence. Okay, so that's an example of me working on my learning and how I can see my learning progression. What happens if I now want to test myself and simulate the assessment environment? So here it's going to ask me to identify each of those structures, but this time, as I answer each question, it's not going to give me feedback as I work through the questions. It's rather going to give me a summary at the end. So I cheekily know that I've given all the right answers for those structures, but now I'm purposefully going to give an incorrect answer. And you'll see it didn't tell me that I was wrong there. Just like it's not going to tell me that I'm right there. It's rather going to give me a summary of my achievement at the end. Okay, so I'm not going to work through every question again to save some time. But if I go to my assessment history, Here is where you can see each assessment that you have completed in totality. So I did this one earlier today, and wow, congrats to me. I was very confident and very accurate in this assessment. So that's what PALMS is like from the student's perspective. Now, you as facilitators, like I said, can get access to the administration and score reporter side. This is where you can accumulate your students into classes. You can assign specific learning modules for them to work on, and you can assign assessments to them on specific dates where you can tell them they need to complete that assessment, and you can use that and incorporate the achievement marks into your formal or informal assessments. So I'll show you how to set up a class and how to allocate modules to them, and then I'll show you how we can interpret how our students are doing. So number one, in the administration side, this is where you will see all of the students in your institution who are signed up to PALMS, and you can add them to classes. So if your students do not register themselves on PALMS, you will not see them here and you will not be able to invite them to a class. You don't have the time to sit and look if everyone has signed up to PALMS, but I will show you a quick way to see who has and hasn't when you create a classroom. So I'm going to come over to classes and I'm going to create a new class. So let's call this webinar test class. And you will assign, number one, the anatomy suite to them. That's all you do in the beginning, and you click create. We will then come into the class to add students and customize what they can view. So when you add students, you can either select them from the list of students in your institution, but that's going to take you way too much time. I would recommend adding from a list. So I have my list of students in my Excel document over here. And what I've done is I've included a student in this list who hasn't signed up to PALMS yet. And I'll show you how it's going to tell us who's signed up and who isn't, and who we need. Oh, let's cancel that. And who we need to send an email reminder to sign up to PALMS. So I'm going to paste my students' email addresses here and continue. You'll see it's telling me it can add these 5 students, but this student was not found. So now I know this student hasn't signed up to PALMS yet, and I need to email them and go, hey, sign up to PALMS, otherwise you're going to get 0 for your learning or assessment that I'm assigning you. Okay, so I'm going to click continue, and those first 5 students have been added to our class, but not the 6th one because they hadn't signed up yet. Now in the class settings, you can either give them access to everything and let them do whatever they want to on PALMS, and you can view their learning history through it all. Or you can give them the guided option and set an assessment for them. So I'm going to remove all access, and I only want my students to see, let's say, the heart orientation lesson. So I'm only going to give them access to this on PALMS, meaning they will only see this one and not the rest of the body. And I'm going to force them to work through the guided option. This guided option is really great because it will give them an assessment 1, or in other words, a pre-test, where it gets them to do the assessment before they do the learning module. And this will give you a baseline of how much they know before they go through the learning module. They will then be prompted to move on to the learning module after that assessment, which is where they'll work through improving their identification until they have mastered each structure. Once they've done that, it will give them an assessment 2, or in other words, a post-test, and it will test their knowledge once they have finished working through the learning module, where hopefully everyone's going to get 100%. Now, after giving my students the guided option, I can also give them a delayed test, which will only open up on a specific date. So let's say I want to use this as a homework assignment, and I'm going to use this as a bit of an informal assessment and incorporate the marks for this into my marking system. So I've set a delayed test, which will only open up for this class on the 25th of July, and I'm going to save that. Now my class will be forced to work through that learning module in the guided manner, and they will set their test on the date that I provided. Okay, this does take a little while to compute and load, so please bear with me. But once it has loaded, I've now set up this class. And I'm next going to take you through the score reporter to show you how you can interpret how well they are doing. Okay, let's see if I can cancel that because it's taking a little bit too long. But let's say in a perfect world, okay, there we go. The settings actually had updated, so I did give it enough time. But let's say we now want to track how well our students are doing. You're going to come over to Score Reporter. So you will maximize the list over here and you will choose where you want to view the history. So I know that I asked one of my students to do work in the heart chambers and pericardia, and I'm going to go track how well the student did there. You will get some overview, sort of summarized information on this first page, which is great for seeing in general how well your school or class is doing. But if we go to classes, you can go into individual classes and view those students' data, or you can come over to the students, which is all the students who have allocated to this specific set of structures, and I can see their information. So only Stephanie over here has done the work, my other students haven't. You can see that I did 32 trials here and I spent 3.1 minutes in total on the learning tool, and I mastered all structures to 100%. So we know Stephanie has a good understanding of these structures. That's great. In the pre-test and the post-test, so the pre-test was before the learning module. Okay, not a great working example, but Stephanie knew 100% before she worked through the learning module. She then mastered all structures and got 100% after the learning module. I then set a delayed test on a specific date for everyone in this class, and after some time had passed, Stephanie got 88% in her accuracy for the delayed test. There are also scores on fluency, and this just gives you an idea of how confident the student was, but it's the assessment accuracy, specifically in the delayed test, that I would want to incorporate into my students' homework achievement mark. And you can save your students' achievements as a CSV Excel document, and you can then incorporate the marks into your marking system from the CSV. Okay, but that brings us to the end of PALMS and very nearly to the end of this session. Just to quickly recap, we spent time on the anatomy and physiology and 3D real-time titles, working through how to enliven our teaching material and prompt the students to guide their own learning outside of the classroom. And then we went through PALMS and saw how students could improve their identification of structures and how we as facilitators can track their progress. As I mentioned in the beginning, if you would like individual assistance on training or specifically with PALMS, because it can be quite complicated, please ask for a one-on-one session and I will happily assist you. I'm just coming into the chat box to see if there's any questions or comments here. Okay, I see someone had an issue with viewing the screen. I hope that was only one person and not everyone. But we will be sending everyone a recording of today's session. If there was any interruptions today, we'll send you the recording of tomorrow's session, which is a repeat, to make sure that you can review it. But I hope that most of you were able to see all of the content that I was going through today. Any final comments or questions before we finish this off? I see some thanks in the chat box. It's an absolute pleasure. We love what we do and we love helping you as much as possible. So thank you for your time here today, and I really hope that it was beneficial. Once again, pop me a mail if you want one-on-one help or if you need me to give you access to the administration or score reporter sites on PALMS. Okay, but I'll stick around to see if any more chat box questions or comments do come into the chat box. But other than that, I'm going to say thank you very much once again, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. I hope to see you in some of our sessions in the future and to hear from some of you over email. All right, goodbye everyone, and thank you very, very much.